Well, good morning, students. This is Mr. V. Today I'm going to cover an introductory lesson on digital painting and mainly for Photoshop in our entertainment design class. This will be very basic, so feel free to pause the video and go back and review if I fly through too quickly. All right, so let's get started. So this is your main Photoshop interface. A couple of things about digital painting you need to know is that we don't use all of the tools in Photoshop. I mean, there are a ton. What we're going to cover today is basically what's what and some general layer manipulation and brush control techniques. First, you go right up here to File, New. Now, one of the things you need to know about whenever you make a new canvas is right here. That's resolution. Resolution is how many pixels per inch. General rule of thumb is always leave it at 300. Also, right here is the unit of measurement that you use for your canvas. For now, let's just make sure it's in inches. And I'm going to do an 11 by 8.5 canvas here, just like your typical sheet of printer paper. So let's take a minute just to kind of get used to what the interface is here. Over here on the side, we've got our major tools, and we're really only going to use a few of those. Up here at the top is kind of how you manipulate and mess with stuff. Now over here, I'm only going to mess with one major window, and that's the Layers tab right here. You can, if it's visible, you can click on it. Or if it's not, you could go up here to Window, Layers. Now let's talk about what layers are. A layer in Photoshop is like a transparent sheet of glass that you draw on top of. And every time you start a new piece, it has what's called a background layer. Try to avoid working on that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new layer, a new sheet of glass, and draw on that. To do that, you just go right down here, and if you hover over one of the tools, it'll pop up a little description of what it does. This one right here is create a new layer. I can click on that, and then boom, I just made a brand new layer here. I could also go up here to the top and go to Layer, New Layer. So the thing about Photoshop is that you can find all sorts of different ways to do the exact same thing in it. So just find one that's most comfortable for you. So right over here is the brush tool. You could hit B for brush to automatically select it. Now you see there's a little arrow right here in the corner of the button. If I hold down the mouse button, it'll bring up all these different versions of that tool. We want to make sure it's set to brush. Now to control the color of your brush, right down here, there's two little boxes. I'm going to click on the one on the top. And that brings up what's called the color picker. I can choose what type of color right here. So if I want blue, and I can adjust that color of blue here. I could go full saturated blue, dark blue, and so on. I'm going to do dark blue, and then let's say OK. So now I've got my brush, but I want to know what kind of brush. Well, if you go over here to the upper left, right here where it says 300, if I click on the drop down, it shows all these really cool little brushes. We're only going to mess with a couple. There's two major types of brushes for beginners that I want you to focus on. There are soft edge brushes, which look like this, kind of like spray paint. And there are hard edge brushes that look like this. Well, I'm going to choose a hard edged, pressure sensitive brush. Now it's pressure sensitive because we got two little points on the end. Meaning, if I click that, I can push lightly or hard. And it gives me variation in my stroke size here. I'm going to make a stroke. And I'm going to hit the Z button, Z for zoom. As a matter of fact, right here you can see this little magnifying glass is selected. I could click with that and zoom in, or I could click and drag left and right to scrubby zoom. Now if we zoom into our brush stroke, see how bumpy it is and how ugly it is? It doesn't look like an actual strip of paint. If I go to my brush tool and I go over here to this little folder with brushes, this is looking under the hood of how the brush works. It looks very complicated, but for now, let's just look at this area here called spacing. What a brush is basically a bunch of dots side by side. The further spacing is, the more it looks like a bunch of dots. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to back the spacing down to about 10%, which means it's really going to jam those dots close together. Let's zoom in. Look how crisp it is. So spacing is very important when making brush strokes in Photoshop. Now if there's a brush that you really like, you can save it. Again, just go to B for brush, and right here in the upper left, you can click on this little button, and I could call it hard brush, and save it and say OK, and here it is. It's already preset. So I don't have to go and make all those settings all the time every time I select a brush. I can just select hard brush and there it is. You can control the size of your brush by hitting the bracket keys. Those are located to the right of the letter P. They're not parentheses, they're brackets. So if I want to make my tool really small and do line work sketches, and then go in and maybe get a larger brush and bulk up shapes and so on, that really helps as well. You'll be doing that a ton. The way layers work is that you draw on a sheet of transparent paper. So let's say I'm going to make a little shape like this, and then I want to go add some other colors to it. So maybe, right here, and oops, I made a mistake. So how could I go and erase just the green without erasing the blue? If I use my eraser tool, which is located right here, that's E for eraser. I could try and erase, but it really just messes the whole thing up. Well, the cool thing about layers is, so I'm going to make a major change. I can make a brand new layer, and then when I go to paint, do what I was doing earlier, and if I'm not happy with it, I can erase just from that layer alone, which is really helpful, especially for beginners when you're understanding how painting works. Now, eventually, you'll get to the point where you can paint all on one layer or many layers. It's entirely up to you. And if you make a mistake, you can grab a color that's already here. Boop. So for example, I'm already on green, all right? But I can grab a color and just paint over it. The way that you grab a color is if you're using a Mac, you hold down Option, and it brings up this little eyedropper tool. So by working in layers, it keeps your work safe. We call that non-destructive editing, meaning if you ever make a mistake, you can just go back and mess with that particular thing that you changed. Here's an example of another cool thing you can do with layers. Let's say you've got a whole new layer. Well, you can turn that layer on and off with the new stuff that you've done on it. And that's done by clicking on this little I button right here. Now, there's another tool called the Move tool. It's located at the very top of your toolbar. The letter V is the keyboard shortcut for it. You can grab individual layers. So you can click on the layer to tell the computer what layer we're looking at and move it. Very helpful. As a matter of fact, right here, you could click on Auto Select and make sure it's set to Auto Select a layer. And so you see right now I've got green selected. Well, if I click on the blue, see how it automatically selected the blue? That's a fun little trick you can do. And it helps you grab layers and manipulate things a lot more quickly. You can delete layers by dragging and dropping to this little trash can icon, or just clicking the trash can icon. Now, another important thing for organization, you can slowly double click on the name of the layer itself and rename it. So I could rename it Base, and then make a new layer and rename that one Shadow. And then that way I know that this is my shadow layer. To undo, for example, if I make 1 stroke, 2 strokes, 3 strokes, those are 1, 2, 3 history states. I've done 3 things. Well, you can undo by going to Edit, Step Backwards. And it's this weird looking keyboard combination. That is Command, Option, Z. You actually hold down 2 buttons and then you tap the letter Z. So I'm going to hold down Command, I'm going to hold down Option, and I'm going to tap the letter Z. Now I just went back in time 1 history state, 2, and 3. So right up here at the top with the brush tool selected, we have a couple of areas. We've got opacity and flow. Ignore flow and focus mainly on opacity. This is what opacity is. If I select a color, like let's say purple, and you see it set to 100% opacity, I can scribble in solid bits of color, or I could hatch in solid bits of color, and that's the full strength of the color itself. Well, what opacity does is it waters down the color. So if I were to manually grab this slider and take it down to like 50, that would be 50% strength of the paint. So if you take 50 plus 50, it's going to start to build onto itself. And you start to, when you cross over the paint, it starts to build up. That's one of the ways that we build up layers when we paint. You can control the opacity of your painting by using the number keys 1 through 0. So for example, if I hit 0, that makes it 100%. If I hit 5, it makes it 50%, 2, 20%, 1, 10%. So let's talk about canvas rotation. How do you mess with your canvas? Let's say that you set up a canvas that's the wrong dimensions. You want it larger or smaller. Well, you can go to Image, and Image is where you mess with stuff. You could go to Canvas Size, and just go and manually change it. I've got on the internet and I've downloaded a photograph of an apple here. I'm just going to pull the screen over. Here's my photo, and then just drag and drop right into your canvas. Now what's going to happen is it's probably going to have this little weird looking bounding box, and it's going to look all jagged. Well, the computer is asking you, is that how big you want it, and is that where you want it? Well, I'm just going to say OK by either clicking on the check mark or hitting enter. And you see how the computer kind of sharpened the image up a little bit. That new photo is a new layer. So if I were to say do a painting exercise where I want to have this off to the side and then paint a picture exactly the same size right over here, I might need to resize this and move it around. And I'm doing that with the move tool. But it feels a little large. If I move it over here to the left, I might not have enough space here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to Edit, Free Transform. And the keyboard shortcut for that is Command T. You'll get used to keyboard shortcuts. As a matter of fact, I'm just going to do that. Command T. And you see how that bounding box came right back. Well, to resize it, you take your cursor, grab a corner, and resize it like so. But wait, that's not right. It's all squished. To make it so it isn't squished, hold down Shift. Shift controls the proportions, and no matter what I do, it keeps the photograph the same proportions and doesn't distort it. Once you get it to a place that you like, either hit enter or check. Bam! And then I'm free to come over here, and if I want to paint, make a brand new layer, get a brush, and I can just go to town right here. Let's talk about saving. So at the end of class, it's important that you save your work with a specific format. That's to keep you safe, because some of the computers can eat your work, and sometimes it can get corrupted. You're ultimately responsible for your work, whether it's corrupted or not, or lost or not, and if it's out of your hands or not. So what you do is, at the end of each class, go File, Save As, and you'll have a screen that looks just like this. Here's my desktop. Put your name in the file, or the name of the project, so I could call this Apple. Maybe your name in case someone else is doing Apple and it gets confused together. So I'm going to put my last name in there, Apple Verzat. And then today's date, which right now is September 5th. I'm just going to go 0905. And that's it. And you hit, make sure it's still at Photoshop format, make sure it's going to your desktop, and go Save. Lo and behold, here is my new file. It's on my desktop. I'm going to open up my Google Drive, and you just drag and drop it. And that uploads things. Also, you want to back it up onto your thumb drive. The way you do that is you put your thumb drive in your computer, you can go to your Finder, and over here somewhere you'll see your thumb drive. It usually has an eject symbol on it. So if I click on that thumb drive, I can drag and drop right down into that, and that'll back it up as well. So that's a quick little intro in how Photoshop works, and we just covered that the first day of class. We'll go a little more in depth in future lessons, so I look forward to seeing you guys. Take care.